Today we're going to get started on the nervous system. The nervous system is comprised of three major divisions. One, the central nervous system. It's also called the CNS. It's made up of the brain and spinal cord, and its major function is to integrate, process, and coordinate sensory data and motor commands. Number two is the peripheral nervous system. That includes all neural tissue outside of the central nervous system. In other words, any neural tissue outside of the brain and spinal cord. Its function is to deliver sensory information to the central nervous system and carry out motor commands from the central nervous system to the body. In the peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system, and that regulates automatic involuntary movement of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glandular activities and secretions, and that would be number three. Two branches of the autonomic nervous system, and there's a typo there, we corrected it in class, it should be ANS, are the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system prepares the body for fight or flight. This involves the involuntary responses to a stressful situation. They include increase in heart rate and breathing rate. It could be due to basic fear. An example might be a robber with a gun. Do you run away or do you fight? The opposite, or second division, is the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and this will act to normalize conditions of the body and return to a relaxed state. The parasympathetic nerves also cause the involuntary responses to decrease the heart rate and calm you down. Make sure you know this picture. This will be on your test. There are some key points on the picture. Make sure you know the dendrites. Dendrites receive the information or signals. Make sure you know the soma or cell body. Obviously, the cell body contains the nucleus, nucleolus, ER, Golgi apparatus, mitochondrion. Make sure you know the axon. The axon carries the signals or information away from the cell body and to the receiving neuron, muscle, or gland. And make sure you know the telodendria. That's the end of the axon that actually creates the synapse. In the nervous system, the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord create or make up 98% of all the neurotissue. The average brain weighs 3 pounds, about 1.4 kilograms. Make sure you know that. Male brains tend to be larger than female brains. They're about 10% larger. There's no relation between size and intelligence. Males tend to be larger in stature, so they tend to have larger brains. The brain is a large, delicate mass of neural tissue, and it contains the internal pathways and chambers, and they're filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Each of the 6 major regions of the brain has a specific function. Ascending from the medulla oblongata to the cerebrum, brain functions become more complex and variable. Conscious thought and intelligence are produced in the neural cortex of the cerebral hemispheres. Brain protection and support. The brain is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier and the meninges. The blood supply to the brain is very important. Number one, it supplies nutrients and oxygen to the brain, and it's delivered by the internal carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries. And the blood is removed from the dural sinuses by the internal jugular veins. The brain has 6 major regions: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, the mesencephalon, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It's divided into 2 large hemispheres. Its primary function is conscious thought and intelligence. There are 4 lobes to the cerebrum. The frontal lobe is involved with voluntary control of skeletal muscles. The parietal lobe is conscious perception of touch, pressure, vibration, pain, temperature, and taste. The occipital lobe is where we have the perception of visual stimuli, and the temporal lobe deals with auditory and the olfactory senses. The cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain, and its major function is to transfer the information between the brain and the spinal cord. The diencephalon is divided into two parts, the thalamus and hypothalamus. The thalamus relays information for sensations. An example would be touch, pain, temperature like hot and cold. The hypothalamus, on the other hand, controls the emotions, the autonomic functions, hormone production, and body temperature. The brainstem is made of three parts, the mesencephalon or midbrain. This allows the processing of visual and auditory data. The pons, that relays the information between the thalamus and the cerebellum. And then the medulla oblongata. This regulates autonomic functions. This includes cardiovascular activities like heart rate, respiratory activities like breathing, and digestive processes such as digesting food. This is a side view of the brain, and we're able to see the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla. Make sure you know those and make sure you can label them for the test. This is a more detailed image of the diencephalon showing you the thalamus and hypothalamus, and then the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The cerebrospinal fluid is very important. It's the way the brain gets rid of waste that rests. So sleep is very important for the regeneration of the human brain and the removal of beta amyloid, which is a protein that builds up and seems to be a precursor with Alzheimer's disease. Cerebrospinal fluid completely bathes and surrounds the brain. It also coats the spinal cord. What are the functions of the cerebrospinal fluid? Well, it cushions the delicate neural structures, it supports the brain, it transports nutrients, chemical messengers, and last but not least, gets rid of waste products. Hydrocephalus is a disease in the skull that causes an excessive production of cerebrospinal fluid that causes the enlargement of the cranium in newborn babies due to the infant's premature brain. The blood-brain barrier is a very important part of our brain. It's a chemical wall that separates the neural tissue of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, but specifically the brain, from the general circulation. It prevents the diffusion of materials between the brain and the endothelial tissues. Only lipid-soluble compounds can penetrate along with neurotransmitters. One of the big problems today is cerebrovascular disease. It's a disorder that interferes with the blood circulation to the brain. The more common name is called stroke or cerebrovascular accident, CVA. There's a shutoff of the blood to a portion of the brain, and at that point the neurons die.